Day number 23 of the 30-Day Solo Podcast Challenge. I'm David Hooper from BigPodcast.com. I'm helping you grow a big audience for your message. The way we're doing it, via podcasting, this series of episodes will help you clarify your message, make more money, since solo podcasting puts you out front and you control all the shots. Because you're controlling all the shots, you've got greater flexibility, release episodes when you want, change things up when you want. You're going to build skills that translate elsewhere: speaking, email, blog posting, organization. And because you're learning how to tell great stories and stories that people are interested in, you're going to find that your personal relationships improve as well. Just like you're building relationships with your audience, you're also building relationships outside your podcast. If you've not done this already, listen to the intro episode first. It's got very important information and explains the what and the why of everything happening here. BigPodcast.com/subscribe has the intro episode, as well as all 30 days of this program. One button is all it takes for you to get everything downloaded to you free of charge. You can go through it at your own pace, although I do suggest one per day for 30 days for maximum impact. I'm guiding you through a system, step by step, brick by brick. We are building this thing piece by piece, and if you stick with me, I'm going to land this plane and get you where you want to go. Previously, yesterday's episode, day 22, talked about rejection. I shared a story of being rejected when pitching my book, Big Podcast, to people to do forwards for it. Everybody's got a rejection story, you and your audience. So sharing that rejection story with your audience is going to get you instantly connected to the people who are listening to you. Here's another way to get connected to your audience. Today's focus is predictions. Here's the question I want you to think about. What do you think is going to happen in your industry or something that's related to what you podcast about within the next year? Here's why this is important. People like to know where things are going. You, as a podcast host, are seen as an expert. You are the authority, and people are looking to you to share with them authority-type knowledge. That knowledge, where are things going in the next year? That's what's going to build you up as an authority on the subject and make people want to listen to you even more. Here's an example. As always, a podcasting-related example. I think within the next year, we are going to see a lot more what I call micro podcast. As you know, big money has come into podcast, and big talent is following that money. I think that's good, but it also means that independent podcasters, people like you, people like me, we have new types of competition that we're up against. And how do we compete? Micro podcast, something that when somebody hears it, it makes him say, this podcast was made just for me. If you'll notice, the big money podcast, the celebrity talent podcast, a lot of those are very general. Now, some of them, if you've got a celebrity attached, they are personality driven, but these celebrities are coming in from other forms of media, mass media that's been blown out throughout the country and even throughout the world. So they're coming in with a huge advantage, a huge audience that you and I don't have. We have audiences that we have had to build from scratch. A lot of times, one-on-one, getting out and talking to people, podcast episodes, blogging, books. It's more of a one-on-one thing, more of an individual thing than it is mass media blowing out a message to millions and millions of people, the equivalent of throwing spaghetti against the wall and seeing what sticks. On this series a few days ago, I talked about Mike Smith and his podcast, Just for Bug Exterminators. More specifically, that podcast is for solo bug exterminators or people who own just a few trucks. These are people who are in the trenches. They actually have to sell the service. They're not simply bug exterminators working for a big bug company. These people live and die by their marketing and their decisions. That's who Mike's podcast is for. That is the example of a micro podcast. And I mentioned this one again because so many people think, oh, micro podcast, that's a small audience. Yes, it can be a small audience. Mike's podcast doesn't have more than 1,000 people listen to it per episode. However, Mike has this thing set up where he's making $30,000 a pop. And he does this several times a year when the people listening to his podcast hire him for his services. That adds up rather quickly. Here's some ways to micro niche. The one I just gave you, that's about industry. There's also geography, gender, religion, sexual orientation, any demographic question that you will answer on a survey. What's your age? What are your beliefs? How much of this do you do? How much of that do you do? How do you get your entertainment? What neighborhood do you live in? Any kind of demographic question is going to help you niche your podcast. If I wanted to take Mike's example, the bug control podcast, female bug control operators. Maybe you've got bug control in the Southeast. You've got a specific type of bug or a specific type of weather that you're dealing with. I know where I am. Termites, big issue. Do they have termites everywhere? They do not. And if you're a termite guy, maybe you want to go geographically. You can start really honing in on who your audience is, talk about things that they can relate to, have those upsells, talk about those $30,000 upsells. Well, you know where to do them if you're only in the Southeast. You do that upsell in the Southeast, and you can see how this thing is really going to connect. And I give you that example to make the point. This is something you've heard me talk about too. What we are doing, it's much bigger than a podcast. You're spreading a message. That's what we're doing. We're doing it via podcasting because this is the 30-day solo podcast challenge. But if you really want to spread a message, you're going to get into books. You're going to get into live events. You're going to get into speaking. You're going to get into mass media when it is time for you to do that. Don't worry about it now. Let's focus on podcasting. But I did want to plant the seed. So do think, where could I go in a year? When you're giving these predictions for your listeners, as part of the assignment for today, I want you to think about you. Where do you want to be in a year? Do you want to expand the media that you're doing? Well, that's possible, but you've got to have that clear message. You've got to have that very specific audience. Again, I'm just planting the seed, getting you thinking about it. You don't have to worry about it too much now because all of this will emerge automatically when you go through this 30-day process with me. So here's the action step for you. Get your pen, get your paper, outline the episode with 3 things, the beginning, the middle, and the end. You could intro it like a lot of listeners, and don't call them listeners, be very specific about this. Think about what is going to happen over the next year. You might give some specific examples. Bonnie from Idaho emailed me just the other day and was asking me, what do you think is going to happen over the next year? Ron from New Jersey had a similar question. So you're going to set it up. You're going to get into the meat. Here's what's going to happen over the next year. And that's when you're going to go into it. Here's what's going to happen over the next year. Then you're going to wrap it up. Put that nice bow on it. My example of that was saying, we're talking about something bigger than podcasting. Yeah, we can talk about where podcasting is going to be in the next year, but don't worry about podcasting so much that you don't look at the bigger picture. Wrap it up, make listeners feel good, and let them know that they're going to be okay when they stick with you. As a reminder, because I know a lot of people are taking this seriously, if you don't have a specific prediction, make one up. This does not have to be released. What I'm trying to get you to do with this process, the 30-day solo podcast challenge, is get in the arena, actually do this stuff, stop thinking about it. You don't have to release it. You don't have to put your hand on the Bible, swear up and down that you're telling the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth. Nobody has to hear what you're doing, but I want you to get familiar with the process so when you're ready to let people know what your predictions are, you will be ready for it. So with that said, hit record, go for it. If you want to upload it, release it to the public, do it. If you want to upload it and just send it to me, have me review it, do that. The way you can get in touch with me, bigpodcast.com. I'm happy to review anything that you are doing for the 30-day solo podcast challenge. So hit me up, bigpodcast.com. Let me know what you're doing. And while you are there, do this before you hit record and make that episode. Go to bigpodcast.com/subscribe. Subscribe to this podcast. Get all 30 days. As I mentioned, what I'm doing is guiding you through a process. What we're talking about here will emerge. It'll happen automatically when you stick this through with me. So go to bigpodcast.com/subscribe. Subscribe to this podcast. Don't miss anything. And while you were there, get my free podcast toolkit, episode templates, social media templates, release forms for your guests, release forms for the music that you use. I've got a process for dealing with guests. You'll get that. There's a lot in this Big Podcast toolkit. It is yours for free at bigpodcast.com/subscribe. Thank you for listening. I will see you tomorrow on the next episode of the 30-day Solo Podcast Challenge.